All right, I think we can get started. A warm welcome to everyone who's at the live webinar. We are broadcasting right now on the 8th of October, live from Brussels, or more specifically from Waterloo, where I am currently based. And welcome to this info session that we as EU Training are providing regarding these two very exciting competitions. After quite some time, here is a wonderful opportunity for you to get an EU career, and not just on any level, but on AD7 and even AD9 level, which, as I'll describe, are somewhat more senior administrative levels and require more responsibility. And AD9 is already a head of unit level. So these are great opportunities that I strongly encourage you to take very seriously, provided you have the right profile and the right expertise, because these will give you a great chance for a very serious and very long-term EU career. So with that, why don't you type into the chat box where you are dialing in from? This seems to be a custom that we are doing at every live webinar. So let's see who is joining us from where. So type into the chat box and it hopefully will give you a good practice to familiarize yourself with the location of the chat box, because that's the place where you can ask me live questions, comments, share ideas, and tell other candidates to be motivated to join this wonderful opportunity. So great, Brussels, Spain, Alicante, Luisa from past work experience at Olaf, very good. Brussels, Dijon, The Hague, Italy, who's Hungarian, very, very diverse, as beautifully diverse as the European Union itself. So with that, also welcome to Lenke and Veronica, who were kind enough to help put this webinar together with all the background information, and they are providing the technical help in the background, which takes me to the bit of housekeeping we're going to do first. If you have any sound issues or some technical problems, usually restarting the browser or trying to log in with a different browser or a different device will fix 99% of the problems. If it still persists, do not despair. We are recording this, and as you will see, and I'll come back to my own profile, but as you will see, we will make the transcript available. We're going to make the slides available, and the recording itself fairly shortly after the live session. But then again, if you have any questions, put that into the chat box. If it's something that can immediately be answered or of technical nature, Lenke and Veronica will be kind enough to address those. If it requires or it relates to the EPSO competitions, then I'll do my best to answer it. Whatever question I may not know off the top of my head, or it requires more research or more information, or we may not have time for that, we'll make sure to follow up in some shape or form, whether it's a Q&A memo or a tips and tricks article or something similar. Very well. So, I skipped the slide about my background. You might know some of the things I did in the past. I'm one of the two co-founders of EU Training, and I'm a former EU official, having worked at the European Commission and before that at the European Court of Justice. And you might know the Ultimate EU Textbook, which is something I wrote many, many years ago, and it's still in print. We are updating it every once in a while. A new edition, well, I won't make any promises. There might be coming in a few months, but it's still under discussion. So with that, why don't we get into today's topic, which is EPSO exams. And we at EU Training are proud to be the provider of all the preparation resources you ever need for these European personal selection exams. Just a few words about us. So we have a very, very diverse and very robust community of past candidates and those interested in European careers, counting over 100,000 users who've come in contact with us or used our services, and hundreds, if not thousands of them are now EU officials, which is something that makes us really, really proud. There's a great community on Facebook. If you are on Facebook, you might want to join certain groups, and this particular competition, or these two competitions, have their own Facebook groups. So those those groups are something you might want to consider, because a lot of information gets shared, rumors, updates, and resources. The test packages that you might want to check out. So we have over 25,000 questions, multiple choice, and other questions in our database, which includes a host of languages and kinds of tests that EPSO might require you to sit, and over 17 million combinations of these test questions have been used over time, which I really find very impressive numbers, along with a number of webinars that you might want to check out. A large number of these webinars are free, completely free of charge. Others have a price tag to it. And we have presented these, the live and the recorded versions, to several thousand candidates. And then, just to give you a heads up, there is going to be a special exclusive offer at the very end of this webinar with a special discount code, and something that you might want to use in the next 48 hours, during which this code is valid. So this is a bit of incentive for you to stay all the way until the end, aside from the hopefully helpful information that I'm going to be sharing with you, and decoding what steps you need to take to apply for these competitions. What are the pitfalls? What are the nuts and or the tips and tricks that you might want to consider to optimize your chances to become an EU official? With that, let's look at the actual substance of today's webinar, which covers essentially two competitions. So the ones you see on screen, and ones that you are most likely somewhat familiar with already. One is the anti-fraud investigators and experts. So that comes with the reference number 394 in the EPSO universe. And there's the other one, which is administrators in digital forensics and operational and strategic analysis. So these are two separate competitions, and we will look at the details for each of these, because both have certain tracks or sub profiles that you need to choose from, and that there are certain factors you very much should consider when making your choice. Perhaps a first very practical question you might ask yourself, because it also impacts your decision whether or not to apply: where are you going to end up working? Not just in terms of institutions, but also in terms of, well, geographic location. And the answer is a pretty straightforward: Brussels, because both competitions are linked to OLAF, the European Anti-Fraud Office, which is located in Brussels. And on Rue Joseph II, if you're interested and you have not yet had the chance to visit OLAF's premises, or at least pass by it, it's in the EU district, and that's the place of work, unless OLAF has some other offices in the area. But it's definitely Brussels, where those who are successful in these competitions will be recruited. So with that, let's dig a little deeper and look at the actual application process. Now, one important caveat: we always say that whatever information I share with you is not the official information. We're doing our utmost to be as accurate and up to date as possible, but the authentic, the formally binding source of information is the notice of competition. When EPSO and the institutions publish these notices of competition, they appear in the EU's official journal. So if you have ever any doubt or any question about it, that's the official source. Now, part of the reason why we do these webinars is to decode and look a little beyond the official information and present that in a way that will hopefully make your life easier and the application more clear. So let's look at that, and start with perhaps the 394 competition, the anti-fraud investigators and experts. So it's already communicated up front how many positions are available, and that is something in the notice of competition. We have taken this information and reproduced it on the slide. As you can see, so for the anti-fraud, there are two levels. There's the AD7 or the AD9. Now, AD7, just for those of you who may not be familiar with the institutional administrative systems, AD7 is not beginner level. So those who are recent graduates have the right qualification and university degrees can start on AD5 level. So that's the entry grade, as they would say. AD7, it usually would take about 6 years, roughly 6 years, to get to an AD7 if you had been recruited as AD5. So it gives you a rough idea that this is a more senior role, and because of that, they require a certain number of years of work experience and qualifications. So in terms of responsibility and in terms of administrative level, and obviously in terms of salary, this is a very attractive proposition. AD9, it's called Experts AD9, but again, in administrative terms, AD9 qualifies you to be a head of unit. So that's already a managerial position. But in this particular case, they do not require this sort of managerial experience. So despite having the administrative status or the grade of AD9, this is not about being a manager or a team leader. So let's look at it, what's exactly being offered here. As you can see, so there's the anti-fraud investigators and operations in EU expenditure and anti-corruption. So that's one track. And then there's the other one, which is focusing on operations in customs, trade, tobacco, and counterfeit goods. Now, important that you can only apply to one grade and one field. So you cannot go for the AD7, let's say, investigators in the EU expenditure and anti-corruption track, and also to the AD9, assuming that you have the required number of years of work experience, or you would otherwise qualify. So you need to pick one from these four. How might you approach this dilemma, if it's really a dilemma in terms of your profile and background? You probably want to make sure that there's no doubt about you qualifying for the right profile. Meaning you have the work experience, that you have the required qualifications, that your profile, there's absolutely no doubt in your profile that might lead to a disqualification of sorts. So that's perhaps your first consideration. The second one is certainly trying to decide or second guess your chances. That is certainly difficult because you don't know at the time of application how many people will actually apply for one track or another. You could guess based on the description, based on your experience in a given field. That is certainly an important factor because you want to maximize your chances of success. You want to make sure that you end up on the reserve list and you will be eligible for recruitment. To do that, you probably want to pick a field where there are more places, just like the AD7, the first track, where there are 35 places. But then again, it might mean more people are thinking the same way as you are, and proportionally speaking, there will be more applicants. Therefore, your chances might be lower. So again, this is a bit of, like in psychology, they call this the prisoner's dilemma, where you're trying to second guess or anticipate what the other person, or in this case, the other candidates, might be thinking, and then you adjust your own decision accordingly. And again, I cannot give you with certainty any final answer there, but these are perhaps questions you will ask yourself. Do I have the luxury and do I have the interest to choose from these fields? Maybe my profile, my background, and my personal motivation and interest essentially qualify me only for one track, so I need to choose that. If you have the luxury of choosing from multiple, these are the questions you would be asking yourself. Moving on to the next competition, the 395. Let's see what it offers. This is on AD7 level only, so there's no AD9 in this particular competition. It could be digital forensics with 20 places available on the reserve list, or operational and strategic analysis, again, 20 places available. So this competition, as you can see, with 2 fields, and again, you can only apply to one field. Now, between the two separate competitions, you can apply for both, because there's no rule, formal or informal, that you could not apply for both, provided you have the right background and the right profile. So the limitations apply within the competitions, but not in between them. So if you can and you qualify, that might somewhat increase your chances of success. Make sure to apply before the 9th of November. The deadline is a hard deadline. There is no negotiation there. There's no way you can extend it. Make sure you send in your application on time. You are not leaving that to the last moment when computers might crash or you get a last minute emergency that prevents you from applying. Make sure that you take it very seriously. You can start your application much sooner. You can save it, so you don't necessarily need to do everything in one go, but make sure that you spend sufficient time on filling out all the paperwork, well, digitally speaking, paperwork and the online fields, and then you send it in before the deadline. By the way, this deadline applies for both competitions. So 9th of November, basically a day more than a month from today. Main question to most candidates in most competitions: are you eligible? So are you eligible to qualify for this particular competition? And eligibility usually refers to your formal qualifications, so the degree, the diploma that you have, and the work experience, both the number of years you have worked and how relevant that work experience is. So how that relates to the topics that you will need to cover as an EU official in that capacity. And that's basically what EPSO and the selection board is evaluating through these various checks and the various tests that they will subject you to. Well, there are general conditions which are the same for every EU competition. This is what you can see on the screen, essentially being an EU citizen, so having the passport of one of the 27 member states. You need to have completed your military service, if that's a formal requirement in the country whose citizenship you hold. There aren't so many that require military service in Europe, a handful currently, as far as I can tell. So make sure that you have completed that, or you have a formal exemption from such service. And then number 3 is that you have the correct requirements to do the job, which I would guess that in this particular competition is even more important, given the highly confidential and sensitive nature of all of these jobs. So this, again, I'm sort of second guessing, and it's not in the formal requirement, but you might be required in certain positions or roles to undergo security clearance, or have they might pay extra attention to having the right documents, that you have not been subjected to any criminal procedures or other, let's say, difficult or complicated background that might hinder you from doing a job which requires a high level of confidence. And then let's look at the language rules before we look at the formal part of the qualifications and your background. As regards language rules, nothing new here. If I compare this competition to the others that have been launched in the past few months. So language rules follow the classic formula, according to which there's a language 1 and language 2. Language 1 has to be one of the EU's 24 official languages. And again, it's not necessarily the same as your mother tongue, because even if you are a French citizen with the passport and lived all your life in France, if your parents have spoken Russian at home and that's what you consider your mother tongue, unfortunately, you cannot use that as language 1. It has to be from among the 24 official EU languages. But then again, it's not linked to your passport. So me as a Hungarian, I could choose English as language 1, or any other languages I might speak, or Hungarian for that matter, as long as it's among those 24. What's very important, though, is the language 2, which must be either English or French. And it has to be different from language 1. So then again, irrespective of what language you might be speaking as such, and what your passport might predetermine you to speak. You can choose any 2 languages here, as long as you're able to communicate and express yourself in those languages. And that becomes a very important thing, because the specific exams that you need to sit in the course of this competition will be administered in language 1 or language 2. And most of them will actually be taken in language 2. So one, let's say, general piece of advice that I often give is, when you are deciding which language to choose, assuming you have the luxury of being a polyglot, you probably want to choose a language 2 in which you can express yourself at greatest ease. So if your written oral expression is better in French, then probably that's what you should choose as language 2, whereas language 1 is used for fewer exams, and it's somewhat lesser important in the exam, in the EPSO competition itself. So language 2 becomes the most important choice that you need to make. All right, with that, let's look at the very specific criteria which you need to meet. And there is quite a bit of variation and permutations, so we'll take a closer look at that in the next moment. But before I do that, I see that there are some questions, comments coming in, and I know that Lenka and Veronica are keeping an eye on that, but there's one specifically that they shared with me on my secondary screen, hence my quick glance at that device. So it says, if an applicant has recently passed the CAST function group 4 multiple choice test, is it necessary to sit again these multiple choice tests for the administrator competition? Those of you who may not be fully familiar with that, so there's a separate track independent of these competitions called CAST. That's contract agent for specific tasks. So those are contract agent, contracts and positions which require you to sit abstract, verbal, and numerical reasoning tests, and an additional one related to the field of your choice. And many candidates would sit those tests. So the question relates to whether you need to duplicate that examination, or can that be used for this competition? The answer is you cannot duplicate that. So every competition is administered separately from the previous ones, which means that even if you got very, very high scores on those competitions, this is a separate story, starts from scratch, and you need to sit each phase separately and then prove yourself. Obviously, if you have experience or you have mastered those particular tests, that will serve you well, but you still need to take those exams separately. Going back, so competition, the 349, the anti-fraud investigators and experts. Let's look at the criteria. What sort of qualifications you need to have? So first, we look at field 1, the anti-fraud investigators and operations in EU expenditure and anti-corruption. So there you need to have a university degree of at least 4 years with a diploma, which would often mean a master's degree. So in most cases, an MA level qualification, and you need to have at least 6 years of work experience. So I point back to my earlier comment when it comes to the AD7 positions, which are 2 levels up from the AD5, and each level takes roughly 3 years of work experience and career to cover, hence the requirement of 6 years of work experience. So if you had worked in the institutions as an AD5 level official, then it would take you also 6 years to get to the AD7, give or take. In this case, when you are immediately hired on AD7 level, the requirement says you need to have 6 years of relevant work experience. And that often becomes a tricky thing, because some of you may have worked in anti-fraud area, or in a state administration, the public prosecutor's office, or in law enforcement, or in the judicial branch. And deciding whether a work experience is considered relevant can be somewhat subjective in some cases. Who decides that? is the selection board. So that comprises EU officials, sometimes trade union representatives from inside the institutions or staff representatives. But in any case, it's a panel that will look at the work experience and then decide whether that qualifies as relevant. So you need to do everything that it's in your power while being 100% fully truthful and ethical to present the information about your background that convinces them that you are a relevant candidate or your experience is relevant to the job. To do that, there are certain techniques that I will share with you in a moment when we get to talking about the so-called talent screener. But going back, what the formal requirements are, as you can see, so 4 years of degree, formal education, university qualification, plus 6 years relevant work experience. Or 3 years of work experience, which probably, or in, not just probably, but in most cases would mean a bachelor degree, so a BA, but then you need to have 7 years of experience in a relevant field. And what those relevant fields are listed not very, very concretely, but relatively in a relatively specific terms. So you can decide whether your specific work experience fits into those categories. So just to sum it up, 4 years plus 6, meaning 4 years studies and 6 years experience, or 3 years studies and 7 years of work experience. And then when we look at the 89, so again, 2 levels up, what the requirement is. Again, you could have 4 years qualification, but in this case, they require you to prove 10 years of work experience. And again, what those 10 years include, it also needs to include at least 3 years of managing complex investigations. And how that's being defined, what's a complex investigation? Again, they give you a couple of ideas that it's transporter, that includes a complex modus operandi or very sensitive, perhaps very serious levels of financial crime or others, or investigations in international environments. So that's the requirement for the 89 level. And it also has an alternative. So again, not 4 years of studies, but at least 3 years of studies. So basically a bachelor's degree, but then 11 years of work experience. And again, the requirement is 3 of which need to have been done in a complex environment or need to have covered a complex investigation. So hopefully that's pretty clear this way. And then there are certain guidelines or additional information, as you can see, of what sort of profile would qualify you for this job. So they give you specific indications that you need to have had a connection with public administration of a member state or EU institutions or international bodies or intergovernmental organizations and similar tasks. Obviously, you need to be able to prove all of this. So you cannot just make a declaration of honor. You need to have some sort of proof if and when you are asked. This could be sometimes difficult if your job was of a highly sensitive nature, or you may have left your previous employer not on the best terms. But certainly you need to have proper documentation to prove that you were not only employed for a certain period of time, but the kind of job that you did actually matches the requirements of the institutions. Now let's look at field 2. The concepts, as you see, are very similar. The topic is different. Certainly field number 2 is a separate field. So it's about anti-fraud investigations and operations in customs, trade, tobacco, and counterfeit goods. This is the same concept. So 4 years of studies followed by 6 years of relevant work experience. Again, giving you certain indications as to what relevant experience means. Then the alternative being, just jumped another slide. So the alternative being 3 years of studies, so bachelor degree again, with 7 years of experience. So the topic is different, but the formal qualifications or timelines are pretty much the same in this field as well. And then again, when it comes to the AD9 level, very similar concept, 4 years of studies with 10 years of experience, and 3 of which has to have happened in a complex environment or complex investigations. And similarly to the previous one, an alternative could be 3 years of degree or 3 years of studies, followed by 11 years of professional experience with at least 3 years in a complex, dealing with complex investigations. So hopefully that's clear. And then again, with a couple of indicators as to what sort of profiles, experience they are looking for to consider you eligible for this track. For all questions, I mean, for all of these profiles and tracks, some important information. So they give you the indication that all of this had to have been gathered, meaning the experience need to have happened after your degree. So if you did a summer internship or work during your studies, meaning your basic formal studies, then that time would not count towards your work experience. And it has to be properly identified as such. So it needs to be really related to investigations, and you need to be able to truly demonstrate that you were not only employed by an organization that has the formal task of conducting investigations, but the actual job profile was related to that work as well. So if you were in the communications department of the police force, probably that would not qualify you for the competition, despite having worked for an institution that seems to be very relevant for the competition. So you need to have the actual job content to be relevant to the competition. Let me pause for a second. I know there are some questions coming in, though I see that inadvertently or on purpose, but I did answer question number 2 already, so I probably do not need to read that out. It was related to the 6 years and the allocation of the time. And I see that there are many other questions, comments coming in, but I'll wait for my colleagues to feed the ones that require an answer right now. All right. Going to the next competition, so the 395, as you'll see, the principles are pretty much the same. The job content, the exams themselves are certainly different, but the concepts or the way they calculate your relevant time and experience would be quite similar. So again, in this particular, with digital forensics, you need to have 4 years of degree with 6 years of work experience in a relevant field. So again, like forensics examiner and a job that would be targeting corruption or financial crime. Alternative to this, alternative to this is somewhat different, where they make a reference to what they call, and let me read it out before I do a mistake, European Qualification Framework Level 7. So that has to be, it's a professional training, so it doesn't need to be a university degree, but a formal, probably accredited qualification that that makes you eligible for this job. And then again, 6 years of experience. So if you don't have a university degree in, let's say, ethical hacking or digital forensics in a formal sense, but you have a fully formalized education that you gain somewhere else in a institution whose degree is formally recognized, that would qualify you for this profile as well, provided you have at least 6 years of relevant work experience afterwards. And here again is the option of having basically a bachelor degree, a 3 years degree with 7 years of work experience that you gained afterwards. So this is the AD7 level. And actually, again, a very similar one to the previous, that it's a a lower level or perhaps a shorter qualification that you gained outside of a university degree, but an accredited institution trained you or gave you a qualification that is formally recognized, but it's perhaps shorter than the other one I just mentioned. In this case, you need to have 7 years of work experience. So you see, concepts are very similar, with a major difference being that an alternative education to university qualifications or university degrees is also considered and accepted as a training. Now, when it comes to, very similar concept when it comes to what constitutes relevant experience and what sort of jobs would they consider as eligible. They give you a couple of hints, or perhaps more than just hints, but they list many specific backgrounds and qualifications for you to check if you have that education or if you've dealt with those topics. And you can see that you need to provide what sort of forensic tools you dealt with. I personally have never dealt with any of these tools, and they are just as cryptic as anything else. So FTK and NUIX and XRY and UFED sounds very, very mysterious and interesting. And I'm sure many of you on this webinar would be intimately familiar with this, which is great. That probably shows that you do qualify for this particular profile. But then again, they would list these tools and software and other applications that you need to be familiar with. So again, that gives you a much more specific idea to decide whether or not you should apply for this and whether you would qualify to apply. And then field 2, so looking at operational and strategic analysis, very, very similar concept. Again, 4 years of formal degree, followed by 6 years of relevant work experience. Same concept, having a non-university, or at least not a university degree level education, but a formally recognized education which matches the European qualification framework level 7, followed by 6 years of relevant experience. Or the same concept, 3 years of education with 7 years experience, or a bit lower or shorter level or shorter course or qualification, followed by 7 years of experience. So that's pretty much it. Again, giving you even more indication as to the kind of applications or tools that you need to be familiar with. And if you have experience using these, that will most likely tick the box and get you through the first hurdle of proving your eligibility. Why is this a great opportunity? Probably I don't need to spend too much time on that. You most likely would not be joining this call had you not been convinced that this would be a great career move. Well, definitely there are many positive factors that would nudge you through the application process. Attractive salaries being one of them. On the EU training website, so on eutraining.eu, where you sign up for this very webinar, you can find a free and directly accessible salary calculator. So it gives you a very, very close indicator as to how much you can expect to earn. So the net monthly income that you can earn as an AD7 or an AD9. There are many factors that it can take into consideration, such as what your family status, if you're married or not, if you have kids or not, where you might be relocating from to move to Brussels. All of these factors have an impact on the salary. And these salaries are very attractive. So for an AD7, roughly it would be around 6,000-ish, so around 6,000 euros net per month, which is a very good proposition and a great attraction for many candidates, aside from other benefits such as family benefits or health insurance and access to European schools, which are offered in many, many languages, depending on the household's main language. So without going further into the benefits and the perks, let's look at the very practical side of things. How do you actually get one of these jobs? What are the steps of the competition? What exams are you required to take to succeed and be placed on the reserve list? So the application process, step one, doing all the formal stuff. So eligibility declaration, picking your language 1 and 2, submitting the application on time before the 9th of November, noon, Brussels time, and then filling in the so-called talent screener in either English or French. And we'll get to the talent screener in a second, making sure that you do all of this within the deadline. Now let's get to the talent screener. Some of you may have had the fortune or the frustration of filling in a talent screener in the past if you had applied for other competitions. Those of you who may not be familiar with what that is, let me give a couple of ideas. Talent screener is basically a question and answer formula, a survey of sorts, where the selection board asks you a number of questions that you need to answer in the greatest possible detail without getting them lost in the information that you present them. So you need to provide all the background information, your professional experience, and all the related information to tell them, to demonstrate to them that you qualify for the competition. And you not only qualify, but you are very well suited or very relevant and suitable candidate. How's the talent screener scored? Typically, any question that they ask you would be worth between 0 and 3 points. And again, it might be different from one competition to another, but it's usually either 0 to 2, 0 to 4, most commonly 0 to 3 points. And then depending on how much your answers demonstrate the existence of a certain expertise or how much they consider you to have had a certain experience, they will give you anything between 0 and 3 points. And then they add up the points, which will create a certain ranking among the suitable candidates. How do you maximize your talent screener score? Well, we have actually a dedicated webinar on that, which you might want to check out. It gives you tons of ideas how to present information, your own professional experience in the best possible way. Obviously, you want to be always truthful and only share information that you can prove. At the same time, it's really vital how you present that information, the sequence through which you build up the arguments, the layout, using bullets, using numbers, making sure that your answer is highly relevant to the question that's being asked. And there are a couple of other points which I'm going to share with you right now, just to give you a teaser of the many tips we share in that dedicated webinar. Well, trying to answer yes to as many questions as you can is one method. Obviously, you don't want to bend the truth. If you don't have a certain experience that they require, you're not going to say yes. But as long as you have some piece of information that you can prove a certain claim, that you worked with a given software, that you worked on complex investigations in the past, well, if you have some good arguments there, try to answer yes, and then persuade them to the best that you can. Concrete versus abstract answer, very common mistake for many candidates, saying, I have a lot of experience in this field. That's a very abstract statement, which doesn't convince anyone. So you could say, I have 6 years and 5 months of experience in this field because I worked in an investigation in country X, country Y, with this very specific topic, which we were dealing with some international crime conglomerate affecting 4.5 billion euros of state revenue. So the more concrete information and the more numbers and specific things you can put in, the more persuasive it can become. So not to discount the importance of being concrete. Providing a lot of valuable information, and again, not to dump a huge number of statistics and numbers and figures, but being very conscious and deliberate as to how you present the information. Another trick is there are usually 8, 10, 12 questions in a talent screener. Some questions may be very similar to earlier ones. Do not just copy paste your answers for lack of time or lack of motivation to tailor your answers to that question. Make sure that you carefully read that, and you may need to restructure a timeline or highlight different aspects of your experience to make sure that you make a good point. And then a couple of other points on readability, how important it is that you segment the information, what you present first or second, that you use bullet points, that the way the visual layout of your answers has an impact on how the assessors, the selection board members, will score your answers. And then EU institutions tend to be quite formal and terminology driven. They have their own jargon, which you probably want to get familiar with, because some jargon you might use in Greece or Portugal or Sweden might be quite different from the ones that EU institutions use. So maybe read Olaf's annual report, check their website, get a bit familiar with their mindset and the way they operate. And then also think about what the institutions and the assessors, what are they looking for? They're looking to hire their future colleague. And even though EPSO only does the selection, they don't do the actual recruitment, still at the selection level and reading the talent screener, they are looking for people whose profile and experience is going to be relevant for the institutions. So trying to think about how a given experience you've gained can be helpful for the work that Olaf and Taxud, the Taxation and Customs Directorate General, deals with. And then last but not least, check out the webinar. There's the link and you can find it on the website. So if you want to really dig deep into this topic, you will hear yours truly, where I shared quite a few ideas, and we look at specific wording and specific text of how not to present, or what's a better way to formulate a message. We also offer actually a talent screener review. So that is a service we offer, but the formal and official review of your talent screener happens as part of the competition. So that's actually step 2. And that is where the assessors are going to evaluate of who passes to the next stage and who doesn't. Those of you who are a bit more familiar with EPSO competitions, I'd like to call your attention to a very interesting fact, a very interesting development. There's no computer-based test. So there's no abstract, verbal, and numerical reasoning test as a pre-selection tool, which means that in the very early phase of the application of the competition, there used to be these multiple choice tests to basically filter out candidates and then limit the number of those whose profile will be then assessed, who will be evaluated. Now, in these 2 competitions, there's no such pre-selection test, the multiple choice test. There is such test, but at a later stage. So just wanted to call your attention to that. It's a change from the past, and even the weight of these abstract, verbal, and numerical reasoning tests is somewhat diminished, which is quite a big relief for many candidates. They are still there. You need to pass them with a good score. You need to practice for that, but it's not necessarily the test that's going to make or break your application. Then comes step 3, the so-called assessment center. The assessment center, it's a sequence of tests or exams, which used to happen in a single day in Brussels, but since COVID, it's somewhat spread, but it's still under one umbrella, one concept, the assessment center, and we look at what tests that includes. How many people are actually invited to the assessment center? The indication is that 3 times the number of candidates. So the three times as many as places on the reserve list. So you can do the math. It's going to be a couple hundred candidates who will be invited to the assessment center. It is conducted in language 1 and language 2, and it's either online or in person. subject to COVID and other restrictions. I see that Karalampos is asking what is step one. Step one is basically the application. So that's what we labeled as step one in the process. And step two was the checking of the talent screener. So application and talent screener. Step two was evaluating, checking the talent screener. And then comes step three. For those who passed the talent screener with good scores, will get to the assessment center. What happens there? That's when the candidates need to sit a so-called computer-based tests, the CBT, the abstract, verbal, and numerical reasoning tests. Just to give you a snapshot, you can find samples on EPSO's website. You can find samples on our website. These are, the verbal reasoning is truly a logical reasoning test where there's a statement and you need to find the correct answer. And the timing is tight, not impossible. So 20 questions and 35 minutes. Numerical reasoning is again looking at logic, where you're presented with a chart with numbers and figures, and you need to find the correct answer. Here you have 10 questions and 20 minutes. And then you have the abstract reasoning, which is a sequence of drawings and little charts which move and turn according to a certain logic. This is very high time pressure, 10 minutes and 10 questions, so 1 minute per question. It's often a very difficult exercise for many people. And then these three are then taken and the scores are calculated as you see on the screen. So for verbal reasoning, you need to have at least 10 points. And for the numerical and abstract reasoning, it's combined. And then again, you need to have at least 10 points. And the interesting thing here is that the candidates are not ranked according to their scores. So passing is sufficient. Passing is enough. So if you have at least 10 points in the verbal reasoning, 0 in numerical reasoning, and then 10 in abstract reasoning, good enough. So then you can pass. Because the way the candidates are ranked and compared to each other in the assessment center is based on the actual assessment center exams, but not on these computer-based tests. So this is a necessary minimum that you need to have, and then you can just tick it off and say, I'm done with this. What you are truly evaluated on in the assessment center is the case study and the so-called CBI, the competency-based interview, which is a special kind of interview, a structured interview where they ask you questions on specific examples, specific situations from your professional life that you need to present to the assessors. We provide a lot of training on that. There are webinars. Our coaches are available for live sessions. We also do group sessions in person in Brussels, and we also do online if that's the requirement. And then there's also a field-related interview. So that's where they truly ask you about your professional background, often based on your talent screener answers. And then on your professional profile, they will ask you specific questions to test your knowledge and the application of your knowledge in that specific field that you've chosen. So that's what gives eventually the assessment center score. So you need to have on your general competencies, there are 8 competencies that EPSO evaluates. So each is worth 10 points. You can have maximum 80 points. You need to have at least 40. And then there's the field-related interview whose score is also added. There you can have 100 points maximum. You need to have at least 50. So certainly there's a pass mark, but you need to pass with very high scores because the candidates will be ranked, and that's when they establish the so-called reserve list. So with that, you get to the end of the process and you succeed, you get on the reserve list. The number of candidates who are placed on the reserve list, that's the number we had seen early on. The reserve list typically has a validity of 1 year, but it's a specialist competition, so it can be extended, it can be longer. And that's the time frame during which you can and hopefully will be hired. That's when recruitment actually happens. And again, just let me give another plug for another webinar that's available. which I ran some time ago. It's called How to Get a Job Once You Are on the Reserve List. So there I share ideas on how you can lobby for specific positions and how I advise you to present yourself and apply for open positions once you are on the reserve list. So how to get the job and how to get through this whole process? Well, a lot of practice for sure, understanding the process and each phase of the competition, prepare for each phase quite a bit of time, and whether it's an hour a day, whether it's 20 minutes a day, but as long as it's regular and you are serious about it, that's really the most important. You probably want to learn test methodology. We have a lot of webinars and ebooks and resources that you can find on the website. If you are overwhelmed by the information, send us an email. We'll guide you to the best resource depending on the competition you're sitting. And persistence is really the most important. You might want to do a study group. You might want to speak with friends and prepare together. So making sure that you do a lot of simulations and you motivate each other and offer feedback. We're here for you. So EU Training is there to offer all the resources and materials you need. We're very proud that we can offer you verbal reasoning tests in all 24 official languages of the European Union. So no matter how large or small a language is, we are there to offer you verbal reasoning practice in that. And obviously all the other tests. So with numerical and abstract reasoning, along with webinars and assessment center, we have a case study simulation tool with or without personalized feedback. So there are a lot of resources that you probably want to check out. Here's a indicative list of webinars that are available and ebooks and all the rest. Now, let me just keep also the EPSO community, the Facebook community, but let me just keep the special offer on the screen while I answer the questions that have come in the meantime. So you can note it down, share it with your best friends while I take a look at the questions and try to answer as many as I can. So here's one that says, okay, I see that there are many of you are asking questions about your specific situations. Would you qualify or not? And obviously, very quickly and on the fly, I cannot answer those questions. And even if I had a lot of time on my hands and you send us a message, obviously we'll try to give you our perspective. But as a general piece of advice, I would suggest really read the notice of competition very carefully, and then think or look at your own experience in very critical terms. So if you were an EPSO selection board member and you were to present yourself as a candidate, think about what things could they challenge, what information they might say, well, this is really stretching the limits of you being involved in a comprehensive or in a complex investigation, or you don't really have that experience. So with that in mind, only consider experience that is bulletproof, that really does not challenge the notions or the requirements that you have in the notice of competition. I know it's a bit generic and not personalized, but I know that many of you are wondering whether your particular situation would qualify. Is it possible to apply even if you belong to a different field, just to get familiarized with the competition process? Well, you can always apply, taking the risk that you may be disqualified because of lack of experience. But again, there's no blacklist, there's no penalty, there's no negative consequence to you applying and not qualifying. So as long as you keep the rules and you're fully transparent and you provide information that is truthful, there's no downside to apply. Now, again, whether you want to spend your time applying knowing that you do not qualify, that's another matter. But as long as you only apply for one field in one competition, so there's no conflict there that you applied for two fields, which is formally excluded, formally not allowed. As long as you follow all the rules and you just don't qualify, fine. So you got experience, you got the exposure, and something that you might be able to use for your benefit at a later stage. Do you know if there's any OLAF manual available for the field interview? I would presume that there are the rules of procedure or the way Olaf conducts investigations, parliamentary resolutions, or the law that established Olaf in the first place, and other operational manuals. Most of it would certainly be available online and public information. So for that phase, you can certainly look around and find those documents and legal texts and get familiar with that. Though the field interview is just as much relevant to your own professional background and the things that you've done. And in that framework, they might ask you questions of how would you resolve a situation based on your expertise. And it's not necessarily a test on how well you know Olaf's modus operandi. It certainly helps, and it can put things in context, and it probably adds to the quality of your replies, but it's not what the field interview is exclusively focusing on. All right, well, some questions more before we finish in respect of everyone's time. What's the risk of successful candidates put on the reserve list and not to get a job at Olaf, provided that the European Public Prosecutor's Office is gradually taking over Olaf functions? Look, as to how the EPPO or EPO compares to Olaf and whether you get a job or not, look, the institutions, and in this particular instance, Olaf certainly had in-depth conversations with EPSO, and they determined how many vacancies they are seeking to fill. So having that number of how many places in the reserve list will be available for candidates, well, that should be all available as jobs. So they would not create a reserve list for nothing. And as long as there are enough candidates who are willing to take a job once they're offered, that those candidates will be hired. So those, I don't see there any particular risk, and especially not something that should discourage you from applying. Is there a limit for application? Do people aged 50 plus have less possibilities? I do not think so. So certainly there's no, the institutions are quite keen on being, let's say, an equal opportunity employer. And especially with AD7, AD9 posts, certainly many candidates have far more experience than what they had formally required. So I would encourage you to apply. And again, as long as you go through each of the steps, I don't see any true, whether it's discrimination or lesser chances of being hired. These are positions which require very high levels of responsibility, a lot of expertise, and you need time to gain that expertise. So I don't see any true risk there. How long does the overall selection usually run from beginning to the end? Well, it often takes 9 months, and it could even take a year. And I know this piece of information may not make you particularly happy, and it's a long process, but going through each of these steps takes time. This is not to defend EPSO for better or worse, but it's just to be realistic as to what to expect and how to allocate your time and resources in the next few months. Make sure you take a job or you have experience. In the meantime, don't put all your cards on this. Obviously, pay a lot of attention and be very dedicated, but it will take time until the process runs through, and especially until a possible recruitment happens. With that, I actually see, one more question came in. If you're overqualified, is that an issue? Not at the stage of selection. So when it comes to the selection, what we're talking about here, being overqualified is not an issue as long as you meet the minimum criteria. If you have more than that, it doesn't impact your chances for better or worse. When it comes to the actual recruitment part, so once you're on the reserve list and you are applying for a specific job, perhaps, but then again, it depends on what that overqualification means. In most cases, if you give good reasons and you're motivated to take up a post, that should not really be a problem. Voila, thank you so much for listening and for being here. Really appreciate that. A big thanks to Lenka and Veronica for being so helpful and making sure everything ran so smoothly. I wish you good luck. Tell your colleagues who might be interested about this webinar, and you can share the resources. But if you are very keen of minimizing the number of competitors, I completely understand that too. So then keep the information to yourself. I hope that this gives you good ideas, and you are now more motivated than before to apply. Make sure you pay a lot of attention to all the details, and I'm sure that you will succeed. If we can be helpful with you training, let us know. You can send us email, contact us on any platform. We'll be happy to guide you to the right resources and provide answers to the best of our abilities. So with that, really appreciate your time. Good luck for the exam, and when you succeed, let us know. We'll be happy to share your joy. All right. Have a nice day and take good care.